Welcome to Black Hat 2026. I'm Mike Shima. Joining me today is Michael Leland, VP and Field CTO at Island. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Michael, we've actually talked in the past, and I'm
have.
quite a fan of Island and what you've been doing. And there's a slightly, at least new to me, topic that I wanted to talk about, the broadly speaking supply chain. But we live in the world of 2026, so it has to be supply chain plus agents and MCPs. So thank you for laughing and appreciating that. But there's a fun nuance here, and I don't want to steal the thunder of what this nuance is of this type of new supply chain. So give us a hint of what this agent-based attack is.
So think of agents as our new virtual knowledge worker, right? And in the past, you would have somebody who was capable and competent to understand what packages he's downloading. Hopefully there's some type of vetting process in place for what's being included in a development pipeline. Agents are not as discerning, it turns out, right? And I think we've also seen recently with things like the sandbox escape from Anthropic against Hugging Face. What we learned from that is, in practical terms, if you give an agent a goal, come hell or high water, it will find a way to reach it, right? Even if it's via an unintended path. And so from an agentic perspective, developers are frequently using NPMs from multiple sources. They're going to legitimate destinations like GitHub and assuming that anything published there should be authorized.
Right.
No more should we trust GitHub's content than we should trust Wikipedia's content, right? No one's vetting it, no one's validating it. And it's interesting because we saw a similar activity against browser extensions a couple of times. 2 years ago, we had Cyberhaven, where a perfectly legitimate extension was compromised by a malicious actor who stole an OAuth token.
Right, subvert the trust.
That's exactly right. The other one we saw just last year was Shady Panda, right? This was a campaign that I like to call the long game.
Okay.
They submitted extensions to the Google Chrome Store. It went through the vetting process. It validated that it was trusted and secure, and then they waited. They waited almost 4 or 5 years, and then they decided last minute to release a little update. And what happened is the validation process for an update doesn't go through the same rigor as a new submission.
Right.
And so they quickly compromised about 200 various browser extensions. Now, what we found very recently in our research is something very similar, but on the AI Agentic front. Somebody published a library of extensions, essentially skills, to a GitHub repository. And of the 7,600 or so extensions, skills that were published, we found over 800 that were clearly malicious. Some were malware, some were crypto miners, some were info stealers, prompt harvesting, and the unsuspecting knowledge worker at this point decided that if one of those packages were legitimate, they should all be fine, right?
Why not?
Over 2 million copies were downloaded and installed. So somewhere out there's an adversary who, is grinning his teeth right now, saying, "I gotcha," right?
Yeah.
And it's through no fault of the developer, right? He decided to implement an agent. He granted trust and authorization to this agent to make decisions about how it should reach its goal. And one of those decisions, it turns out, was nefarious.
Yeah, and there's a subtlety here too, because even, you mentioned, for example, like you mentioned Anthropic Hugging Face, it was OpenAI and Hugging Face, right?
Sorry, yes.
But Anthropic then also admitted one, and I think just today Meta said, oh yeah, by the way, we just let ours run loose too.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring that up is a little bit of, with humans, there was that idea of typo squatting, or making a typo in the package, thinking like, oh, that should have been an underscore and a dash, or I mistyped the name of the package. This is actually even a little bit different because it's the AI, the agent, is looking at this list of packages, and it's not even like the typo, it just says, here's a repo that says, here's how you install, this is what you need to install, go and install it. And it's that, where is that trust within that? And that's what you're highlighting here.
So the interesting thing too is, I've seen Claude Cowork. I give it a goal. It hit a brick wall. It said, I can't go any further. I know what I'll do. It said, I'll write a Python script, and it'll go out to my terminal and curl an NPM package from a source that I never authorized. It didn't know whether it was a legitimate NPM package or a malicious one.
Right.
It had the right code in it to perform the task it needed. Unfortunately, it also had a lot of other code in it that it wasn't expecting, and neither was I. So I think the learning here is the old trust but verify no longer works, right? If you don't put your agentic workforce in the same guardrails and governance constraints that you do your users, we're in for a really interesting risk profile coming up.
Yeah, and especially that you're mentioning trust but verify. Your examples too were that trust on first use. The idea of, I think it was Shady Panda, you're describing, oh, we're going to be very polite and very proper on the first trust check. And then it's pretty impressive to wait a couple of years.
It is.
But it's to their advantage. And we could also look at what it was, the XUtils was another very long wait for a long-term attack horizon, if you will, for this threat actor. But basically on what I'm building up here is that trust has to be continuous.
Right.
We've learned that with humans and our supply chain. All these skills, bear with me, I'm setting this up, these skills are just markdown. And so it's one thing to be able to say, oh, this code is obviously calling out to a shell. Mm-hmm. It's calling bin bash curl, and it's piping through curl. That's probably a bad thing, but there's a lot of natural language in these skills files. How do you grep for that? You can't really, right? So what are you doing here? What are the defenses?
So we actually built an AI analysis tool for all skills, MCP services, or MCP servers, plugins, even your various packages. And so when we started delivering Shadow AI visibility to our customers, at first it was just show me what AI is in use. And
Very
that
helpful.
That was hard enough,
Yep.
right? And I've told this story a few times. We had a customer who insisted they only had 8 sanctioned AI tools in use. We did a very short assessment, a week. We deployed our browser to some users, we deployed the extension to the others, and we found 243 AI tools that were being used. Now, this was not a malicious expansion of AI usage, but if you put a roadblock in front of a user and you tell them that AI will make them more productive, but then you stop them from using it, they're going to find a way around it, right? And so no matter how diligent you are in trying to build a governance policy and acceptable use on AI, if a user thinks that he's going to be more productive, more innovative, he will find a way to use it.
How are the incentives aligned? Yeah.
And it's funny because there's a dichotomy between the management team, the executive team, the board saying, thou must use AI because it will make us more productive and effective. But then there's the lawyers and the governance team saying, be careful using AI because we don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? And it is a moving target with AI. And because the modalities of AI are so broad now, the ones we never thought would be here, right? We always knew about interactive generative AI tools, but now you can hook up skills to Gen AI. You can connect MCP servers to those tools. Even if you think you're just interacting with a chat tool, it may also be connected to Slack or Salesforce or something else. And so now more than ever, how we are governing the usage of those tools has to be brought into visibility. Not only what tools we discover, but also the full audit of how those tools are being used. Every prompt, every response, every tool call, every tool result. But to your question earlier, how do you really determine a risk profile of a markdown file of skills? Every time we discover these technologies now, we built an AI assessment tool that develops a risk profile for each one. So we actually read the skill file, and then we generate what's called a list of insights. And we tell you this could be a dangerous tool because it has file system access, because it can read and write data to the network. There's a risk of data exfiltration here. There's a risk of prompt injection here. We can't fix the problems of these skills, but we can bubble up the risk assessment and let a knowledgeable user or administrator determine if that skill is appropriate.
And that, to me, that sounds appealing because what you've described these are the behaviors that you're seeing within that skill. And even when I was talking about the agent baiting, that's I think the term you've given for this.
Right.
Download this skill. That isn't even exactly a prompt injection that says ignore your previous instructions. It's just here's a repo that has a bunch of dependencies that you probably should download. It just happens that one of those dependencies is malware. So you're not changing the intended behavior. You're just directing them to some bad behavior.
Right.
And seeing that, network access. I probably don't need network access or file system access. Those sound much better as triggers to I can build a policy around that. I can build governance around that. And that's what sounds like you're setting those those components to be able to build on top of, right?
There's one more way to enforce a policy in this environment, and that is that most agents still have to go through an MCP server to get to its application or service. And the OAuth token that is issued between the application and the agent has permissions associated with it. So let's say you decide that an application needs access to Salesforce, and the agent requests a read-write token. Island has an MCP server now that can intercept that, issue a read-only token to the user, so we can say, yes, you can get access to Salesforce. I'm not going to let you write data to it. You can read data from it. It's called token brokering, and the first MCP server you touch can do that. The other advantage is that agent never has the official OAuth token of Salesforce. Yes. It has the one that we've issued it via an NHI, a non-human identity. So now you have full accountability, and you have the ability to intercept that trust process and assert the appropriate permissions and privileges as appropriate.
Yeah, and it's going to make me smile with my security hat on, because having that token be 100% of the time read-only, it's a very strict, that's a very concrete boundary, as opposed to earlier we were saying, well, we think, looking at this natural language, we think it's accessing the network, we think it's accessing the file system, and again, that could be, even if you're saying you have 90% confidence, that's 10% of, I'm a little bit worried. Should I really trust this as a security boundary, right?
So there's two ways of doing assessment. There's a static assessment and a dynamic or heuristic assessment. Static is what we think it will do, and that's the insights we're generating now. Heuristic assessment is what it actually tries doing. And so beyond just giving an inventory and a policy enforcement, we're now doing runtime assertion. So you can say that in this application, you're allowed to describe these things in the prompt. There are more things to worry about now than just security. There's content moderation, bias, toxicity,
safety,
harassment.
Yep. Yeah.
There's obviously the indirect prompt injections, the jailbreak attempts, downloading packages from unknown sources, things like that. But on the runtime side, you've got to deal with everything from, is this activity being issued by a user or an agent? Is it going through a browser, an extension, or a desktop application? Because the biggest risk we have is these tools, if handed off to an agentic behavior, they can do bad things at machine speed, which means anything you're attempting to do proactively or retroactively, I would trust the fact that if a user does something poor, I'd have enough time to get notified about it, contact the user, revoke that file if necessary.
The impacts are perhaps a bit smaller.
The blast radius is much larger with Agentic, right? Because of just the speed at which it can operate. And the skills with which it can go around our guardrails.
And part what I hear also from that story is that the deployment sounds like you can actually go, as long as you can solve that shadow AI problem, you figure out where are people using this, it's not hard to drop in, is it? It's not like you need to everybody needs to become a Kubernetes expert, run your container, here's your sandboxing, it's much simpler, yeah?
But here's the thing, where you enforce it matters. Some vendors architect their solution that do all of their enforcement at the cloud proxy. Okay. Right? So as long as the data gets to the cloud proxy, they're going to try to break and inspect and then intercept there. That worked great for years. What it doesn't do well is understand user intent when the user intent is taking place between Claude code and the local file system. What's on my page right now, and what am I trying to copy and paste into this command line? Yeah. User intent is occurring so far out in front of the user now that waiting till it hits the first cloud proxy is no longer effective, right? So it's an effective spot, but it's not the only one and not the most effective.
Yeah.
And which is why we constructed this concept of the agentic control plane for the enterprise, as many control points as possible in the browser, in an extension, on the desktop, on the network, in the LLM gateway, in the MCP server, and then lastly, you've also got things like open telemetry, OTel, that gives you tremendous high fidelity visibility into the way the models are actually working. Token utilization per user, per session, per skill. If you wanted to do departmental chargebacks for token burn down, you could, because you have that telemetry now. It also gives you performance metrics and then AI adoption metrics. So it's not only visibility, it's enforcement, and it's enforcement in as many locations as possible, but picking the right spot of enforcement has to do with where users are interacting with data.
And that makes sense in the sense of where are the boundaries I care about, or where are those important boundaries where sensitive data shouldn't be crossing. So that part makes sense. Now, I want to ask, that also sounds like there's so many areas, you have a scaling problem and suddenly a policy problem, that how do I keep my head straight as the security team or creating these policies, and so I don't get overwhelmed and just say, well, it's star.star once again.
So This is the important part about having a ubiquitous platform and policy. We're at Black Hat. There's 600 vendors out there. 300 of them weren't here last year. 300 of them probably won't be here next year. Every one of them has a solution for one niche problem. And you could, if you were well-intentioned, stitch together a solution that would deliver all of these solutions. The problem is you've got probably 6 different consoles, 4 different agents, multiple control planes, and the sprawl you talk about is not just to the user, it's to the administration team, it's to the operationalization team, and the security operations
That's where
team.
mistakes are much more easier to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
We constructed an architecture where it's a single policy, a single control plane, a single user console, and a single data lake. And the fidelity of that data lake telemetry is beyond what a typical SOC analyst has ever seen. I came from an EDR world, and before that, I was co-founder and CTO of a company that built a SIM. So I understand the security operation practitioners' challenges, and normally it's 4 different consoles. We used to love saying the phrase, single pane of glass, right? I used to tell people that what the vendor community has delivered you up until now is a single glass of paint, right? You're bouncing around between multiple consoles. You lose context as you're doing so. If you have to manage policy across more than 1 or 2 platforms, you're going to have challenges. It's going to be costly, it's going to be complex, and you're probably going to have gaps. Any vendor out there can solve one problem, but try to find a platform vendor that has the ubiquity of control planes, and more importantly, the control points, so that we can reduce that cost and complexity for both the user, the admin, and the security operations practitioner.
Yeah, and I think that's the wonderful story that just, again, takes the human element and tries to minimize that human making mistakes. And
there's one more big point, though, and that is that vibe coding has made anybody a developer.
Yes.
The problem is the applications that are being vibe coded have to be hosted somewhere. They have no concept of your role-based access control, your authentication principles, your business context, or your data governance policy. But any vibe-coded application published inside of an architecture like ours has to abide by the same guardrails that you built for the user. We're calling it vibe publishing.
And it says, it's not saying no, it's just saying yes within these constraints.
Exactly right.
And unfortunately, we also have the constraints of running out of time for this conversation, but Michael, I've appreciated it. This is really good.
Thank you so much.
And thanks everyone for joining us. To learn more about Island, check out securityweekly.com/islandbh. You can also find all of today's published interviews at securityweekly.com/blackhat. And guess what? This is our last interview for first day of Black Hat, but we're going to be right back here again tomorrow for the final day of Black Hat 2026. Thanks everyone.